Dr. Ovamir Anjum, we welcome you here at University of Management and Technology. Wa alaikum assalam. सर आप ठीक हैं खैरियत से?
अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह।
बहुत शुक्रिया, बहुत शुक्रिया। अच्छा जी, we'll start formally right 7 o'clock at Pakistan and I think 9 o'clock at USA. I request all of you to mute your mics. I request our MPhil scholar and distinguished Qari of Lahore, Qari Abdur Rahman Sahab. You will start the session with the recitation from the Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تأكلوا الربا أضعافا مضاعفة واتقوا الله لعلكم تفلحون. واتقوا النار التي أعدت للكافرين وأطيعوا الله والرسول لعلكم ترحمون. وسارعوا إلى مغفرة من ربكم وجنة عرضها السماوات والأرض أعدت للمتقين الذين ينفقون في السراء والضراء والكاظمين الغيظ والعافين عن الناس والله يحب المحسنين. والذين إذا فعلوا فاحشة أو ظلموا أنفسهم ذكروا الله فاستغفروا لذنوبهم ومن يغفر الذنوب إلا الله ولم يصروا على ما فعلوا وهم يعلمون. أولئك جزاؤهم مغفرة من ربهم وجنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها ونعم أجر العاملين. قد خلت من قبلكم سنن فسيروا في الأرض فانظروا كيف كان عاقبة المكذبين. هذا بيان للناس وهدى وموعظة للمتقين. ولا تهنوا ولا تحزنوا وأنتم الأعلون إن كنتم مؤمنين. إن يمسسكم قرح فقد مس القوم قرح مثله وتلك الأيام نداولها بين الناس وليعلم الله الذين آمنوا ويتخذ منكم شهداء والله لا يحب الظالمين. آمنت بالله صدق الله العظيم.
Jazakumullahu khairan ahsan al-jaza. Qari Abdur Rahman Sahab, thank you so much for your beautiful recitation from the Holy Quran. And now we will proceed our session. It is an honor for me that we have with us Dr. Ahmed Umar Murad, Chairman, University of Management and Technology and Board of Governors and ILM Trust. And also we have our guest speaker of today, Dr. Ovamir Anjum from University of Toledo, USA. And the session host, Professor Dr. Tahira Bashara Sahiba, Chairperson, Department of Islamic Thought and Civilization at University of Management and Technology, Lahore, Pakistan. I will request Professor Dr. Tahira Bashara Sahiba, head of the department, to welcome the chief guest and the speaker and all the participants. Over to Dr. Tahira Bashara Sahiba.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Sajid, for the warm introduction. And for giving me the opportunity to welcome today's honorable speaker, Dr. Ovamir Anjum. On behalf of my dedicated faculty and esteemed scholars, it is a great honor and pleasure for all of us that you have spared your precious time for this meeting, despite the time difference. Dear participants, as we already know, that our honorable guest speaker is a renowned Pakistani American academic and author who has made commendable contributions to the American Journal of Islamic Social Sciences and penned down a remarkable book called Politics, Law, and Community in Islamic Thought, the Tamiyan Movement. His research perfectly mirrors our department's vision and objectives of focalizing the nexus of contemporary and traditional Islamic thought. And all of us present here look forward to hearing more from Dr. Anjum himself about his recent experiences in research. Lastly, I would also like to thank Dr. Ahmed Umar Murad, Chairman, ILM Trust and UMT, for arranging this opportunity to interact and learn from Dr. Anjum experiences. Dear participants, indeed, there is a lot to learn and share. Thus, I hope today's talk inspires us all and we leave with great food for thought. Now, Dr. Sajid, you may proceed, please.
Thank you so much, Professor Dr. Tahira Bashara Sahiba, today's host of this session. You have also introduced our guest of today's, Dr. Ovamir Anjum. He has a specialty in ethics, politics, law, theology, and special relevance with the classical and medieval Islam and with the perspective of the Western and Islamic thought. Without any delay, I request Dr. Ovamir Anjum. He will start today's presentation and the session. And here we have in the participants, most of them are the researchers of Islamic thought and civilization at MPhil and PhD level. And we also have some scholars from Karachi and different cities of the Pakistan and the rest of the world. It is a great honor for me as a moderator of today's session that Dr. Ovamir Anjum, he is the renowned American Pakistani-based scholar, is with us today. And without any delay, I will request Dr. Ovamir Anjum to start his thoughts. And after that, we will have a session for question and answers. And I request the participants, we have both options. You can also send your question in chat box. And also we will provide the opportunity that you can ask the question after the discussion of Dr. Ovamir Anjum. And you can ask with the opening of your mic, you can ask directly the questions, inshallah. Thank you so much. I will request Dr. Ovamir Anjum to start today's discussion on the different thoughts on Islamic research and his specialities. Thank you so much, sir. You are here, and I will request you to start your discussion.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we are hearing you, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Allahumma lakal hamdu hatta tarda wa lakal hamdu idha radita wa lakal hamdu ba'da ar-rida wa lakal hamdu hamdan kathiran tayyiban mubarakan fih. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa zid wa barik ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Thank you very much for this warm welcome. I'm very touched and by the fact that all of you are present at this time, which is, I know, quite late in Pakistan, and you could be with your families. I will be, inshallah, very brief. I want to elicit discussion. Also, please note that I will be speaking in English, but also please feel free to ask your questions in Urdu, and I will try to answer them in Urdu, inshallah. First, I want to emphasize that the process of engaging in scholarship, this engagement with scholarship is an act of ibadah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the name of Allah, Al-Haq. One of the most beautiful names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Haq. As you know, the Sufis and Salikin of Islam remember Allah especially by this name Al-Haq, because He is the reality, He is the truth. And all scholarship ultimately seeks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the extent that it arrives at the truth, it sees an element of the truth of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So improving our academic scholarship, our skills, our scope of knowledge, our methods of engagement, our breadth of conversations with various bodies of knowledge in the world is, in a sense, very much both an academic enlightenment and enrichment, but also a spiritual elevation. I will say a little bit about my work and then go on to talk about the experience that I will speak to today, or on the basis of which I'll recommend a few things. I work on Islamic intellectual history. So history is my, if you will, home department. Intellectual history, history of ideas, history of philosophy. I'm in a department of philosophy and religious studies. So I do history and philosophy both. But also I've worked in the fields of anthropology, which is the study of human cultures, as you all know, and sociology from a theory perspective. And my first book was on the history of Islamic political thought in the first 7 centuries. And I've also translated Imam Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah's work on Tasawwuf, Madarij al-Salikin. And although I study classical Islamic scholarship through modern Western scholarship, I have, engaged in and worked with and seen two seemingly very different bodies of scholarship at work. The classical scholarship of the early Islamic period, the Seljuk period, the Mamluk period, people like Al-Ghazali, Ibn Taymiyyah, Al-Juwayni, rahimahumullah, and also modern Western scholarship in various fields. I also, as you know, as you may know, edit a journal, American Journal of Islamic Society, AJIS, AJIS. And it is that experience that I want to bring forth today to share with you. As the editor of the journal over the last few years, and also I'm editor-in-chief of Yaqeen Institute, which is a public intellectual journal, whereas AJIS is academic journal. But I'll focus on the academic writing. The submission rate at the journal versus the actual acceptance rate of articles that make it to publication is about 9-1. So which means about 90% or so articles are rejected. And I want to talk about the articles that are rejected. Why is it that we reject 90% of the articles? Most of those articles, almost 85% or 80%, are rejected in the editorial review process, meaning before they ever make it to the blind review process, they are rejected in simply editorial review. I open a file and I look at the abstract and the first paragraph, and I have a pretty good sense of whether this article is going to make it or not. And I want to talk about why that is and how many of you researchers and many of you, inshallah, mashallah, more senior than I am, will probably know this, but I want to share that especially with junior researchers. We receive articles from all over the world, all over the Muslim world, that is, because we are a journal of Islamic intellectual thought, Islam and society. We receive a number of articles every month from Pakistan, from Malaysia, from Turkey, from Nigeria. And most of those articles that are submitted from the Muslim world, unfortunately, do not make it. They are rejected in the editorial process. And the reason is that when I open an article, what do I look for? The first thing I look for is, of course, the title, the abstract. And the second thing I look for is how the first sentence of the article, when the author tells us, what is this article going to be about? And finally, I look at the references, how old they are, how relevant they are, and whether they represent a good literature review of everything that has been published on that topic in at least English, because our publication is in English, but also if it's a topic on which there's plenty of material in Arabic, then I would look for references in Arabic as well. And so on that ground, most of these articles do not make it. They don't succeed. So let me then, on that basis, suggest first what scholarship is about. And this is a difficult process to understand. And I find that in Muslim world, especially Muslim world, especially Pakistan, in India and Nigeria, there is a particular type of problem, which is that there is a difficulty in understanding what academic scholarship is. People don't tend to differentiate academic scholarship from, say, religious sermon. And so that's one problem, that you have to understand a register of scholarship, a mode of scholarship that is academic. And good academic scholarship, and in fact, is not different in the West than it is from in the East, or nowadays in the modern world, from the pre-modern world. If you look at works by Al-Ghazali or Ibn Taymiyyah, Al-Juwayni, you find that you have similar kind of style that makes those great and successful scholars. So let me just summarize what I'm going to be talking about today in one piece of advice, and then I'll go and break it down. When you write an academic piece of scholarship, whether you're writing a paper or a book, your purpose is not to teach. Your purpose is not to preach. Your purpose is not to demonstrate how many things you know. Those are three things that you have to preclude. That's not the purpose. So you're not teaching people, because when you're, as a scholar, you're talking to people who already know. They already know the definitions. They already know the basic references. And you're not preaching them, because as academic scholars, your purpose is only indirectly and perhaps secondarily or tertiarily that you are trying to change their behavior. As academic scholars, you are concerned with changing their ideas. When you're changing ideas of people who already know, in many areas, they know more than you. So think of your advisors, academic advisors and teachers. And if you want to be a great scholar, then think of the best scholars in the field, which means you have to know who the best scholars in the field of history are, for instance, or best scholars in theology are, best scholars in tasawwuf are, whatever your area of study, best scholars in anthropology, for instance, and you are addressing them. So do not say everything that you know from the beginning of time. Do not include all the definitions. Rather, make your point, make your thesis in such a way that will be recognizable to scholars in the field who are not scholars in your specialty, right? That's why you're writing the article, because you're working on a problem. So let's say, for instance, you want to write a historical piece on the relationship between tasawwuf and sociological conditions in 3rd century Baghdad, right? So let's say you want to talk about the origins of tasawwuf, origins of Sufism in 3rd century Baghdad. You are going to start with your thesis and cite scholars who have talked about 3rd century Baghdad and tasawwuf in the briefest way and get to your point. So let's say your point is, well, tasawwuf is rising among non-Arab elite. Let's say that's your thesis, that tasawwuf rises among, it's a science that develops or a discourse that develops among a particular population. Well, if that's your thesis, you're going to state that, and then you're going to show by breaking it down, right, how you got there. So the purpose of scholarship, and this is the most important thing I think I'm going to say today, The purpose of academic scholarship is to move academic conversation. It is not to preach or to teach or to show your scholarship. It is to move the academic conversation from where it is to a better place, which means you need to know what the leading academics in the field already know, and you are adding something to that. So you're not talking to common people. You're not talking to people who want to learn about the basics of the tasawwuf, for instance, or the basics of sociology, for instance. Now, this is the number one reason articles are rejected, because if an article opens and it wants to say something about everything that they know about that the author seems to know about the tasawwuf, that means that they are not an academic scholar. They do not know how to write academically. So that's number one. Imagine that there is a scholarly conversation taking place in the world. It has been for a very long period of time. And you have to know where that academic scholarship is, right? And then you move to, so if you don't know where the academic scholarship is today, you will not be able to write a compelling academic piece. Which takes us to our next point. I see your hand, but I'm going to, inshallah, finish this point that I'm making and then take questions if that's okay.
We will take a question after your whole discussion, inshallah.
Okay. Excellent. So then I would say, if I were to talking to many authors in the Muslim world who submit and don't make it, right? Many of you are well-published authors, so consider this only a suggestion. Now, first of all, you have to have deep and wide reading in the subject that you're writing. You cannot read just one type of material. So let's say you're writing in Pakistan, you're reading only Urdu material, which is great. You will bring something valuable by reading Urdu material, but you have to expand your scope of reading. You have to read Arabic and English as well. So that, and read it as widely as possible in that field and deeply. It's much better. And sometimes I receive 3 articles by the same author. They're simply trying to publish any one thing. Write one thing that will be good is much better than if you write 3 articles that will get repeatedly rejected or get published in a second-class, second-rate journal. Because good scholarship speaks for itself. Especially nowadays, you'll find both English and Arabic sources on any classical Islamic subject or even modern Islamic subject easily available online. So now, because of the internet, it is really no excuse for people not to have read. When you're mentioning, for example, an ayah in the Quran, you have to also reference the tafasir, the classical tafasir that are available, whether it's At-Tabari or Ibn Kathir or Zarkashi, Zamakhshari, so on and so forth, that to make your point that your tafsir is not merely your reading of the Quran, but it's something that has established history of understanding in that way. Similarly, when you're reading a hadith in, say, al-Bukhari, you have to, if you're giving it a particular interpretation that is not obvious, you have to back that up. Go out and read Ibn Hajar's Fath al-Bari, and then say that this is the meaning of this hadith. In other words, scholarship is about backing up what you're saying, right, with evidence, with scholarship that's available broadly and widely. And Islamic scholarship is a marvel. It's a marvel that has existed, for 1400 years. It has developed, and especially in the 20th century. And that's a point I want you to remember, that in the 20th century, in the 21st century, especially in the last century, 20th century, there is just such an enormous increase in the number of Arabic classical scholarship that have become available to us. They have gone from being manuscripts in some library in Europe to published form. They have been published in Egypt or Beirut or Medina and Mecca or in Pakistan or India. And this scholarship, as it has become available, it has transformed Islamic scholarship in the West. Unfortunately, in the Muslim world, outside of some Arab centers of scholarship, such as Cairo or Mecca and Medina and Saudi Arabia, Muslims have not made use of that scholarship as much as Western scholars have. So you'll find a Western graduate student writing about the Tasawwuf using the works that have been published of Abdurrahman, or say Abdurrahman al-Sulami and Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami, or somebody whose books have been published, but Muslims are still using the few references that have been translated into their languages. And that shows as a problem, a lack, because the scholarship has moved on from that point. Now people are talking about a new problem and deeper problem. Finally, I will say, develop your writing, right? And again, I'm talking to younger authors, younger students. If you're writing in English, bite the pill and write a lot. Writing is not easy. Write, and you think through writing. It may be that you write in Urdu first, right? And good writing is something that's going to show regardless of whether you first write in Urdu and then translate, but write extensively and then translate. And if you're going to submit your article in English, and the articles that I see are published in English. Unfortunately, I do not see scholarship in Urdu. I'm not aware of that. So write, and usually you should write many drafts and reject most of them, because they help you develop your thinking until you get to a draft that you like. Finally, I will say, do not claim Islam says X, Y, and Z. Islam doesn't talk. That's imprecise. You can say that in a khutbah. You don't say that in academic scholarship. You have to say specifically who says. Are you talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying in the Quran? And then you have to explain your understanding through tafsir literature. Are you talking about hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And then you have to cite the hadith correctly, right? Or you're talking about ijma', right? Some kind of unanimous consensus in which you have to give your sources. So when you write, then write with specificity. And the best way to develop all of these techniques that I have just talked about is to just read widely and deeply. All right. And finally, once again, I will end with the point I made at the very beginning. You are writing not to teach, not to preach, and not to demonstrate your scholarship. You are writing to move the scholarship where it is today, the best scholarship, the cutting edge scholarship. You address that and you want to move it. You want to agree with points, disagree with points. If there's a debate going on, you want to take part in that debate. Or you want to say maybe that debate is pointless, but you have to know what that debate is. All right. So finally, I will just repeat in Urdu what I said, my main point. सबसे अहम और सबसे पहली बात कि किरात जो है आपको पढ़ना है, बहुत वसी मुताला होना चाहिए. जितना ज्यादा आप पढ़ेंगे उर्दू में, अरबी में, अंग्रेजी में, उतनी ज्यादा आपकी जो है आपको समझ आएगी कि किस तरह जो है वो कि स्कॉलरशिप किस मकाम पर पहुंच चुकी है. और हैरत की बात यह है, मैं भी हैरान होता हूँ, हालांकि मैं यहाँ 20-25 साल से पढ़ा भी रहा हूँ कि नए जो स्कॉलरशिप आती है, नए जो जैसे ग्रेजुएट स्टूडेंट लिख रहे हैं, डिसर्टेशंस लिख रहे हैं, किताबें लिख रहे हैं, ख़ास तौर पे अमेरिका में और यूरोप में, तो उससे जो है वो बहुत सारी ऐसी जो पहले गुत्थियां थी वो सुलझ जाती हैं. तो वो समझने की ज़रूरत है कि हमें जो है वो इस्लामी स्कॉलरशिप जो है वो वेस्ट में, मगरिब में इस वक्त बहुत आगे पहुंच चुकी है. उसको हमें कंट्रोल करना है मुसलमानों के तौर पे, लेकिन उसको कंट्रोल करने का और उस पर छाने का तरीका ये है कि हम उसको पढ़ें और उनसे ज़्यादा पढ़ें. और फाइनली फिर उर्दू में जो मैंने सबसे बड़ी बात ये की कि मेरे नज़दीक सबसे अहम चीज़ ये है कि आप समझिए कि ये जो स्कॉलरशिप, ये इल्मी हरकत जो है वो, इल्मी क्या कहते हैं, जिस मकाम पे पहुंच चुकी है ये इल्मी कम्युनिटी, इसको समझ के आप इसको आगे बढ़ाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं. इसका मतलब आपके जो आर्टिकल लिखने का और एकेडमिक किताबें लिखने का मतलब जो है वो ये नहीं है कि किस तरह इसको वाज किया जाए. तो आपको पूरी तारीख उस सब्जेक्ट की पूरी तारीख देने की जरूरत नहीं है, बल्कि जो मसला आप सॉल्व करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, मसला जो हल करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, उसको समझिए और उसको आगे बढ़ाइए. ये है स्कॉलरशिप का मकसद, एकेडमिक स्कॉलरशिप का. और इसको जो है वो इसी की वजह से बहुत सारे जो आर्टिकल और किताबें जो रिजेक्ट होती हैं वो इस वजह से होती हैं. और हमारे पाकिस्तान में और मुसलमान मुल्कों में बहुत ज़्यादा ऐसे लोग हैं जिनके पास इल्म है, लेकिन उस इल्म को जो है वो फैलाने का और इल्म को आगे बढ़ाने की ज़रूरत है इंशाल्लाह. तो मेरे पास ये कुछ गुजारिशात हैं. अब आपके सवाल और जो आपकी सजेशंस हैं उसका इंतज़ार है. शुक्रिया. अस्सलाम वालेकुम रहमतुल्लाह.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ovamir Anjum. I think the audience you were addressing, you have talked about the points about the research and the academic writing, and the people who are listening to you are directly relevant to this topic. And I really thank you so much for your discussion, and this is the practical, you can say, the implications what the researchers want, and their entire need at this stage where they're going to start their academic writing. आपका बहुत शुक्रिया, आपने उस मौजू पर बात की है कि जो वाकयातन इस वक्त हमारे जो स्कॉलर्स हैं उनकी ज़रूरियात हैं, इस वक्त जो हमारे लोग मौजूद भी हैं ऑडियंस में, इन्हीं चीज़ों की ज़रूरत है. तो नाउ हाउस इज ओपन फॉर क्वेश्चन एंड आंसर्स. जो सवाल करना चाहते हैं आइदर इंग्लिश में या उर्दू में, वो अपना माइक ऑन करके डॉक्टर साहब से अपने सवालात कर सकते हैं. जी, उमर फारूक सईद पहले सवाल आप करेंगे. उमर फारूक सईद साहब, बाकी लोग अपने माइक बंद रखेंगे, बारी बारी हम सबकी बात सुनेंगे. उमर फारूक भाई.
First of all, sir, thank you very much for the talk. It was a very good talk, and I would like to ask a couple of questions. In fact, I would like to put it in one. You mentioned about a thing that we should increase our scholarship by reading more and learning more, which is of course very right. But on the other hand, you also said that don't show up that scholarship in a paper or a book or something. So I couldn't differentiate between this point, that if we are going to increase our scholarship in this term by reading more and of course learning more, so how can we not show it up somewhere if we are transforming into a paper or a book?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is that you are not going to show your scholarship by listing everything that you learned but rather in the quality of the argument that you will make. So the big difference is that your scholarship will show in the quality of the argument, and when the argument requires it, then you're going to say, this is what in the footnote you will say, well, this scholar says this scholar says this, I disagree with them, I disagree with this, I agree with this scholar. But what you will not do, and this is a very common mistake in articles that come out of really the entire, I should say, non-Western world. I see submissions from all over, and this tends to be a style in which people write. Perhaps this is how people are taught, which is that so let's say you want to write about Tasawwuf in 3rd century Baghdad, right? And you have, let's say you're writing an article, you have a new idea, you have about 6,000 to 8,000 words to write in English. That's a typical length of a journal article. In that, people will spend 2,000 or 3,000 words, first half of the article, talking about the definition of tasawwuf. And then they will go and talk about the word comes from suf, cotton, or does it come from safsata, sophistry? And then they will talk about Greek, the knowledge of the Greek world. Perhaps they will talk about Hassan al-Basri. All of this is completely irrelevant, right? You will go and talk about the actual thesis that you are mentioning, right? And then in the process of making your argument, you will demonstrate your knowledge. And in fact, this method that I'm talking about, you will learn this method by reading widely, especially if you're reading modern cutting edge scholarship, whether it's coming out of the Arab world or the English speaking world or European world. There is good French scholarship, German scholarship, but these days English scholarship has really surpassed any other European language at this point, with the only exception is that sometimes German scholarship is something that you need to read in addition to English. You don't have, it takes some time for translation to happen. But other than that, and that's a good thing for Pakistani scholars, right? Because English is readily available, and English is hands down the most important language of scholarship available today. There are more books coming out in English than in any other European language put together. The second most important scholarship language of modern scholarship is Arabic. And of course, if you're doing Islamic scholarship, then it's the #1 most important language. But Arab scholars are also doing important work. So you want to, when you read that, you realize how to do this kind of, what is it that scholars are disagreeing about, right? So that there was an older method of scholarship where you give your definitions and you give your history of everything. And until today, and this actually is also the case in Arabic dissertations, that almost every dissertation mentions the same information from same sources, from Arabic lexicons or the tabaqat literature. They will mention, if they're mentioning someone, they mention their history and their biographical details. And these are easy, if you will, low-hanging fruits. These are easy to, these details are easy to get, but they're no longer what scholarship needs to know, because they have been said 100 times over. So the way you demonstrate your scholarship or your wide reading is that you understand what the question is. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you so much, Dr. Umar Farooq Saeed, who asked these questions. He's a PhD scholar at Islamic Thought and Civilization. He also authored wonderful books on Islam and philosophy, and has been translated into different languages. Next question goes to Minahal Bhatt. Minahal Bhatt, ask your question, please.
Assalamu alaikum. I just wanted to ask, So, do you think it's genuinely possible, for instance, also from like an anthropological perspective, to be completely unbiased while writing a piece and to be completely detached from what you're writing about on an emotional or ideological level? And it'll be great if you could like share some tips while we're writing on topics that are essentially close to our hearts as Muslims, for instance. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. The question, especially in social sciences, whether it's anthropology or sociology or, you know, economics or psychology, in these sciences in particular, and in history, and history in the West, in the United States, is classified as humanities, but it really functions as a social science. There was this old ideal of objectivity, meaning that you are distant from your subject matter. This was Max Weber's idea, early 20th century, and has really dominated social sciences. But it no longer is something that is considered possible. And particularly recent scholarship, postmodernists particularly, show that objectivity is not really possible. So you're not quite looking for detachment, but rather you're looking for a balance between various available objective perspectives, right? So you have, as an anthropologist, you want to be fair studying these subjects that you're studying, and you want to show your own perspective, but you want to show it not sort of, it shouldn't be something that, I can see you're a Muslim, that's why you're saying this, but rather, and this is my suggestion, this is how we do it in the West, and it's increasingly considered the right thing to do, which is to say, look, I'm writing as a Muslim, but I can see that I'm saying these things because I'm a Muslim. This is what I see, and here is scholar X who writes, as a Westerner. Perhaps they have their own perspective. This is what they say. This is better than, of course, surreptitiously not recognizing your perspective. Now, I understand that this is my feeling, and based on some conversations I've had from scholars in Pakistan, that Pakistani anthropology is still 50 years behind, in the sense that they are still reading old books, and there is still a sense that objectivity and then Western perspective is the objective perspective, whereas any other perspective is local and native. So you have to see, of course, advisors who will be reading your work. But as far as publishing your work in the West and in the best journals in anthropology, I think the method that I'm talking about is compelling, is something that is respected. And for this, of course, I recommend, if you look at Talal Asad, for instance, or Asadian school, whether it's Sabah Mahmoud and Hussein Agrama and others who have written, Asad Ahmed, these people have written, where it's their own perspectives are involved, but in a way that's tasteful, that is tactful, that you can understand it. I hope that answers your question, at least.
Yeah, that helps perfectly. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Usama Arshad, now you can ask your question. Usama Arshad, are you here? Okay, Jalila. Who is there? Tariq, please wait. There is a line.
Hello,
people are waiting.
Assalamualaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, please. Jalila, please.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask, how does one essentially adopt a unique perspective of their own whilst making sure that we don't repeat what's already been said and are actually adding something to a discussion after reading, for example, like a lot of great scholars and their research work, as of course, like their work is very impressionable. So how can we like adopt a unique perspective?
Yeah, that is a terrific question. I think to some degree, it's a matter of confidence. Confidence is something, it's not a scholarly thing, it's a subjective thing. I know some people have less of it, some people have more of it. And frankly, if you have less of it, you're likely to do a little more reading and be more humble, which is a great asset in scholarship, to have the humility, knowing that you have impressive scholars. But I think one thing that happens, I think naturally, is that when you're reading scholars disagreeing with each other, then you develop an opinion more easily than if you're reading just one scholar and that you're impressed as hell about everything they're saying. You love them, you think they're beautiful writers. But when you read other people disagreeing with them, then you realize, aha, maybe there is that there, and then I have my own disagreement that I can pursue. And sometimes scholarship isn't about necessarily disagreeing with everything before. You may end up confirming based on your own case study. So let's say, depending on what you're doing, right? If you're doing you provide your own arguments. If you're doing, say, something more philosophical, then you provide your own argument, perhaps to a conclusion that has been established by some and it's being questioned by others. And you say, well, I agree with A and not B. Similarly, in anthropology, you're studying a new community, a new, new ethnographic subject, and there you say, on this basis, I disagree with Asad, and I agree with Steve Caton or whatever, so on. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that definitely helps. Thank you so much.
Dr. Samiullah Faraz, please ask your question, sir.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone, really grateful, Dr. Ovamir, for your thought-provoking talk. Actually, it was very fantastic. I think such sessions also will enable us to know the Western style of research and writings as well. So in this context, I would like to ask you and to take your guidance that what are the specific major areas of Western scholarship on research, specifically on Muslim or Islamic studies, either theology or classical studies or political thoughts of Muslims. So what are the specific or main focused areas nowadays of Western scholarship on Islamic studies? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Western scholarship on Islam is enormous, and it has increased over the last 30 to 40 years in such a way that, you have a book on every subject in Islam that you can think of. And one of the reasons why there is explosion of scholarship, especially after 2000, 9/11, 2000, but really after 1979, after the Iranian Islamic Revolution, there has been more and more departments in the West, particularly in the United States, have been increasing people who work on Islam. And one of the ways in which Western scholarship has changed is that the old style Orientalism is transforming, it's dying out. And one of the reasons for that is that increasing number of Muslims are coming to the West or are becoming Muslim in the West, converting to Islam, and Muslims tend to go into these fields and study, and so the perspective of these fields is changing. I should caution, however, that in the West, Western scholarship is also very secularizing, deeply secularizing, right? So this isn't to say that all scholarship is equally good, and you really have to know, in order to know the difference between Muslim scholars who become wound up in some Orientalist perspective of the old style. And there are all kinds of Orientalism, old Orientalism, new Orientalism. The new Orientalism tend to be the woke kind, meaning that this radical left social justice movement type of scholarship, whereas LGBTQ and all of these kinds of things are very, they become powerful factors that bias scholarship. So much so that in certain fields and certain departments, critical theory, women, gender studies, much more than real scholarship, it is ideology that dominates. And so you have to know where the real scholarship is coming from. But I think that the fact of the matter is that when it comes to the trenches, when I talk about the trenches, right, the actual PhD scholars and good scholars, when they are looking at the texts and they're thinking about what to make of them and bringing together all the existing scholarship, at that level, people become committed to knowledge itself, even if they are themselves not Muslim. And you see, as a Muslim, when you're conversing with them, you can see that, aha, this is a good point they're making, even though they're not Muslim, or even though they're not good Muslim, but they're making a really good point. That allows me to go back and look at my my own work. But you have to know, of course, you have to be good in theory. You cannot become a disciple of any Western scholar who is not, in my view, you cannot become a disciple of any scholar who doesn't have Iman. But you can learn a lot, even agonistically, as the word that's used, meaning in opposition to them, even when you're trying to respond to their critiques, but you're doing so cautiously and respectfully, and by really reading and understanding their argument, you can learn a lot. So the short answer to your question is, really, Islamic scholarship is in every field. The most developed part of Islamic scholarship right now is two, history and law. Islamic law is extremely well developed. And part of the reason is that many scholars who've educated in Azhar or Medina, they have come to the West and they go to places like Harvard and Princeton and Chicago. And so you have the merging of the two worlds, which is producing good scholarship in Islamic law. There are problems with it as well, but the other field is history. When it comes to history, the Muslim world universities they haven't even begun yet. They have no comparison to Western scholarship. That's unfortunately a fact that we really need to take our history back. But when it comes to theology, or it comes to Quranic studies or Hadith studies, you'll find that Muslim world university, especially in the Arab world, are ahead in some respects, in fundamental respects, like especially on Quran and Hadith. But when it comes to law, you have newer perspectives that are coming out of the West. In history, certainly. And newer fields, particularly social sciences, anthropology, sociology, are fields where, particularly anthropology, where the study of Muslim reality, of lived Islam, as it's called, that is a really active area of research. That's something that is almost non-existent, as far as I know, right, in traditional Muslim settings and Muslim world universities.
Is there available anybody who wish to ask any question? किसी ने कोई सवाल करना है, हम इंतजार करें या आखिरी सेगमेंट की तरफ हम आगे बढ़ते हैं? मेरा ख्याल है कि क्वेश्चन का इस वक्त जो सिलसिला है वो खत्म हो चुका है।
जी, आप सब मिस ताहिरा वांट टू आस्क समथिंग।
जी, उन्हें कहें कि माइक ऑन करें, अपना माइक ऑन करें। ताहिरा, माइक ऑन करें, पूछें सवाल। Ji.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
First of all, I really thankful for your guidance because we are being a PhD student. I think so we need this workshop or your lecture. Alhamdulillah. Here is a question. Maybe it's a very basic question and maybe not. Is there any specific order that we have to adopt when we start reading books or articles? Yani modern to classicals or classicals to modern? Is there any specific order we have to adopt?
It's a great question. So my recommendation to people who can afford, so I advise different people in different stages. And by the time people come to me as graduate students, they already have a certain formation. Some people come from a religious background or a madrasa background, and I have to sort of orient them in the Western literature. Some people come from Western literature, and I orient them into classical literature. I don't know if there is one right order. I mean, frankly, some of the best scholars are non-Muslims who converted to Islam after having learned Western scholarship. They came to Islam, learned Arabic in college, and then began to read the literature and became terrific scholars. So I don't think that there is one right order. One thing that I do think is something that's really important in the Muslim world that we have to do is to learn Arabic. You have to master Arabic. And there is, of course, speaking Arabic, which is something for scholarship secondary. What's important is reading comprehension. You have to read Arabic widely, and especially classical Arabic. And that is something that it's a painful process, and not a lot of universities tend to emphasize that. So that has to be your own commitment, that you're going to read these classical sources. Otherwise, what ends up happening is that people, American universities and graduate school really emphasize learning languages. And so nowadays the universities require 3 languages, and some of them even will test you before you get into graduate program. If you say you know Arabic, they will give you an Arabic exam, because they don't want to waste their time teaching you Arabic. You have to come in knowing Arabic. I think Arabic is the most rigorous requirement at this point in the West, if you're doing anything related to Islamic studies. But of course, Persian and Urdu as well. People who do Persian and Urdu, there are great opportunities here in the West to learn. But of course, in Pakistan, you have a great advantage that learning Urdu and Persian are super easy, right? Of course, you read Urdu, and going from Urdu to Persian is relatively easy, and then learning Arabic is relatively easy. You can really do that in 1 semester if you have good Arabic and good Persian, or at least in 3 semesters, right? And not knowing good Arabic and relying on secondary sources is one of the major problems that makes people lose out on originality and good research. So you can see that when people are reading or writing, that they have simply read secondary literature that people in the field already know, and it's very difficult for them to say anything original because they're only looking at the secondary literature. So depending, of course, what your area of study is.
Thank you so much. Any other question? And this is the final call for the questions because we have limited time. Okay, now we are going to the last segment of our session. जी मैडम, आप कुछ कहना चाह रही हैं मैडम?
Yes. Just I would like to say thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ovamir Anjum, for joining today's webinar and enlightening us with your knowledge. I believe your point about not confusing academic scholarship with religious preaching is absolutely essential and cannot be stressed on enough. I speak for everyone when I say that we are genuinely humbled by your presence and your insightful topics of discussion. Thank you, Dr. once again. And lastly, a huge thank you to my whole faculty and especially Dr. Sajid Iqbal, who brilliantly hosted the program, and to our wonderful scholars who asked such insightful questions. Once again, Dr. Avamir, thank you so much. Inshallah, soon we will arrange one and other webinar. So my dear student, today we are very happy. We are very pleased that Dr. Awamir discussion is very beautiful, very beautiful. Once again, I will say, Lam yashkurin nas lam yashkurillah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, madam. Now the time of the last segment, I will request the chairman, University of Management and Technology and chairman, Board of Governors, Dr. Ahmed Umar Murad for his last sentences about the whole topic. Over to Dr. Ahmed Umar Murad.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Ovamir. It was really wonderful to hear you. I was very impressed by your ideas and thoughts the first time I heard you in Chicago. And also we had a very nice conversation on the phone about the Islamic scholarships and where we need to take it. Obviously, the West has made tremendous progress in terms of researching and producing ideas around Islamic thought and Islamic history and Islamic law and everything else. But the gap I see is that in the Islamic world and the mainstream Islam, where you oftentimes hear these voices of change and progress needed in how we think about how we apply Islam to our society here. I see very little effect that Western scholarship is going to bring here into this, our local context. And in the local context, obviously the scholarship has to be born from within and not from without. Born from a perspective of a believer and not a perspective of a non-believer. But we need to adapt it to the modern world. We need to make it applicable to our society, the new life, the new world, the new social structures that have been coming up in the society. And so I think it's important that if you can just say a few words on how we can borrow from the Western scholarship and still apply them to make them more relevant for our own society here, and not just an intellectual contribution to Islamic thought. Yeah. Would you be willing to spend?
Sure. Sure. So I should say that I haven't in my discussion, because I'm talking to scholars, mashallah, in Pakistan, my country, very, very dear to my heart. I haven't mentioned the problems and challenges that we have in the West, in America. Let me tell you something, just a little picture of what it means to be a Muslim in America. We have, of course, in terms of luxuries and wealth, and there is a lot more here than anywhere else in the world. But at the same time, the fears and the insecurities that people have, and the way the kind of compromises that people make are also quite significant. According to one survey done in 2009 by Pew, America is religiously a very fluid society. There are about 1% of American population is Muslim, so something like between 3 to 5 million Muslims in America. And based on Pew survey, 23% of Muslims who are born as Muslims or are Muslim when they are young leave Islam by the time they reach adulthood. Let me repeat that, 23%. That is 1 in 4 young people who are born Muslim leave Islam. Now, this number may be exaggerated. This was one survey. Of course, Pew is one of the most respected survey organizations in the US. Nevertheless, it is our lived experience as well that, you know, I have talked to numerous young men who have left Islam, and I'm brought in to talk to them. And the point is that there is a great pressure. Their Islamophobic movements are very strong, and they're both the left and the right are left and right-wing politics are directed at either attacking Muslims or attacking Islam in various ways. Or the new strategy now is changing Islam. And that's why you scholars over there in Pakistan, in the Muslim world, are really, really important, because if you have the dual responsibility, first to enlighten your own societies, the kinds of things that come out of Pakistan, such as a mob killing, you know, a mentally challenged man in the name of blasphemy, that hurts Islam all over the world. Pakistan is able to both hurt and help Islam all over the world, because people see Pakistan as this really passionately Muslim place. And that kind of thing is used by Islamophobes, right? And I know it is not easy to challenge those things in Pakistan, but we have to work up the courage among scholars in particular, and religious scholars in particular, to speak out against that, because that hurts Islam everywhere in the world. It gives fodder to Islamophobes that this is what Islam is. So people who want Islam, well, this is what you're going to get. You're going to get innocent people lynched and killed, and that's a burden, if you will, that Pakistani scholars have. But the Pakistani scholars have an advantage, that they can speak from a place of faith, and if they so wish. And that, I think, is another important lesson to learn from the West. In the West, a very large number of people with Muslim identities who go into academia are swept away by leftist ideologies, by ideologies that you can no longer say that these people are mu'mineen, right? They are not mu'min. They will be Muslim, but they will be shy to say that they really believe and they really are committed in any kind of passionate way to the truth of Islam. And so that's the other side of Western academy and life as a minority in general. You know, to give you a sense, if you ask any faqih in history, what do you say about living in a place where 1/4 or perhaps 1/5 of young Muslims are going to lose their faith? They will say, absolutely not. You're not permitted to live there. And this, I think, is the fear and the tension that the American Muslim community has, that in Pakistan you don't. But at the same time, the burden that you have and the responsibility that you have, I wish and I pray for a day when it'll be one of you talking to us Muslims in the West or elsewhere, and telling us about how to do the wonderful research that, you know, that becomes then Pakistani pride. And I think that that's quite achievable, inshallah.
I think that's a great note. Thank you very much, Dr. Ovamir. It's a very great note to end this here. And I again thank you. I really appreciate your agreeing to talk here and give all this time and preparation to come and speak to us. And the whole UMT staff, I'm sure, is very thankful and grateful to you. And I hope that in the future, we are able to engage you for more collaborations between what goes on here at UMT and the work that you are doing, inshallah, in the future.
Inshallah.
Thank you. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ovamir Anjum. Thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed Murad, for introducing Dr. Ovamir to the UMT faculty and Department of Islamic Thought and Civilization. Really, this is the need of the hour, what had been discussed by Dr. Ovamir and yourself. And I also thankful to all the participants, our students of PhD, MPhil, and faculty members, and rest of the participants from different countries of Pakistan, from Air University Islamabad, from some of the participants from USA, and some of them from Karachi. And I really thankful all of you that you spent a lot of time, and really we learned a lot from the scholarship of Dr. Ovamir Anjum and Dr. Ahmed Umar Murad. And now we are going to close our session. And again, as mentioned by the Dr. Ahmed Murad, we will make a chain of some sessions, such type of sessions for getting benefit, for to increase the level of our research. And here we have very brilliant students in the cluster of the students of MPhil and PhD. And we hope that these type of sessions will enhance the quality of research and will contribute a lot in the body of knowledge from our side, inshallah. Now I am ending the session with with the thanks from my side as a moderator of the session, and from the whole faculty of Department of Islamic Thought and Civilization. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam, mashallah, Dr. Sahab, great. Very well.
बहुत शुक्रिया,
माशाल्लाह,
आप सबका बहुत शुक्रिया, बहुत शुक्रिया।
वालेकुम अस्सलाम रहमतुल्लाहि व बरकातहू। डॉक्टर साहब बहुत मुबारक जी, मैडम आपको भी बहुत जबरदस्त सेशन
जी
था,
जी
बहुत इंफॉर्मेटिव
सब
था।
बहुत
जी
मुबारक
थैंक यू,
माशाल्लाह।
बहुत शुक्रिया
अच्छा
सर,
रहा
बहुत
है।
शुक्रिया।
अल्लाह आपको जज़ा दे और स्पीकर
डॉक्टर अब्दुल अलीम साहब, आपकी डॉक्टर अब्दुल अलीम साहब बहुत अच्छी हाजिरी रही माशाल्लाह, आपकी फैकल्टी और
अल्लाह
आपके
आपको
स्टूडेंट्स
जज़ा
की तरफ
दे।
से।
अल्लाह नहीं, प्रोग्राम ही माशाल्लाह बहुत अच्छा हुआ है। अल्लाह ताला
वालेकुम अस्सलाम,
मज़ीद आपको
वालेकुम
कामयाबियां
अस्सलाम।
दे।
बहुत शुक्रिया
आमीन।
सर, माशाल्लाह बहुत कमाल की
बहुत शुक्रिया,
जनाब ये कॉन्फ्रेंस हुई, सेशन हुआ।
बहुत शुक्रिया,
बहुत शुक्रिया,
बहुत शुक्रिया।
बहुत मेहरबानी सर। सर इसके एक्सक्यूज मी कोई सर्टिफिकेट्स वगैरह तो नहीं मिलेंगे?
चले देखते हैं, देखते हैं, देखते हैं जी। ओके जी, अस्सलाम वालेकुम रहमतुल्लाहि व बरकातहू।
बहुत मुबारक हो सर, बहुत
जी बहुत मेहरबानी, बहुत मेहरबानी, बहुत मेहरबानी।
सेशन रहा आपका।
साजिद साहब
जी
ये
अब्दुल
रिकॉर्ड भी हुआ है डॉक्टर
जी,
साजिद साहब,
रिकॉर्ड
ये
हुआ है जी,
रिकॉर्ड
हम इसकी सेटिंग करते हैं जी, रिकॉर्ड हुआ है जी, रिकॉर्ड
जी जज़ाकल्लाह
जी, रिकॉर्ड हुआ है
जज़ाकल्लाह।
जी, बहुत शुक्रिया जी। अस्सलाम वालेकुम रहमतुल्लाह। जी मैडम,
तो वो इतना डन कर दिए।
चलो बंद कर, पूरा तो बैठे चले, चलिए सुनो तो